discussion. And we have sort of a very tight schedule. So I think we will start right off with Sandra, who already introduced herself a little bit. Sandra Hellstrand, who is a member of the board and vice chair of the Fackförbundet ST's section within the higher education sector. So I'll start off by giving the word to you, Sandra.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. And then I will have to ask Oscar to switch the slide. So I'm going to do a very brief presentation, which is basically only on the most political issues in the report. And then Oscar will follow up with more details regarding work environment and equal treatment and the type of issues that we deal with locally at the higher education institutions. So this is a political section, and there will be a small debate after this presentation. So just as a kind of overview, the results in general, which you will learn more about later on, is that international doctoral students more often work overtime and experience work-related stress issues, discrimination and harassment, and being left out of information or social events due to language issues. And we argue that one of the reasons for this may be what we are calling migration-based insecurity. Can you switch the slide, Oscar? So especially for third country doctoral students, which are the doctoral students from outside of EU, EEA, there are, since 2021, lower chances of getting a permanent residence permit. So that's been a problem for many years now, and we've been pushing for change. And there are improvements regarding this in 2 days' time on the 11th of June, which basically mean that 3 years, you have to be a PhD student for 3 years before applying for a permanent residence permit. But in order to be granted that residence permit, you also have to have 12 months of secure employment at the date of the decision. So that's intended to be an improvement, and it will be an improvement for some doctoral students. But there have already been criticisms raised regarding whether or not the intention behind this reform will actually be fulfilled. And one of the reasons for that is that there are often quite long waiting times at the migration agency, half a year or more. And that means that a lot of PhD students will not have 12 months left of their employment at the date of the decision regarding their permanent residence permit. And that will limit the scope of this reform. But there's also kind of a general issue with migration legislation in Sweden during the last kind of 10 years, which has eroded trust in Sweden as a country to immigrate to, because there are very complex rules regarding immigration, and there are constant changes in both regarding the framework for researchers and PhD students and for all immigrants. So that's been a problem. And if you switch to the next slide, Oscar. And so this is kind of an added difficulty for international PhD students. But now we also have for all PhD students a kind of employment-based insecurity, which has to do with the fact that being a PhD student is a fixed-term employment, and it's a fixed-term employment that is followed by often even shorter fixed-term employment after graduation. And this creates a mismatch for the international PhD students, specifically third country PhD students, because of the consecutive fixed-term employment over long periods of time, and the migration legislation do not align. It creates a very stressful situation. And we believe that this may be one of the reasons for why international doctoral students experience more stress than other doctoral students. And if you switch again, Oscar. Right, so one of the results from the survey is that 7 out of 10 international doctoral students somewhat agree or strongly agree that the uncertain employment conditions make them, after graduation, make them hesitant to continue in academia. So that's a lot of people that we may lose from academia, highly skilled people. And that probably has to do with both the fact that the uncertain employment in itself is not that attractive, and also that it creates this type of problem with the residence permits. And you can switch again, Oscar. So we have some political recommendations in this report, and that has to do with both of these areas. So both when it comes to migration legislation, we argued that there should be further political reform to alleviate the situation for international doctoral students and other researchers. And there should, of course, be sufficient funding for the migration agency to make sure that there are not these long queues, there's long waiting times. And when it comes to the employment-based insecurity, we also need more direct funding for higher education institutions in order to make it possible to have more secure employment after graduation. And also there needs to be a development of a more clear tenure track to more secure employment within the higher education sector. And that's the end of my presentation. I'll hand over back to Sebastian.
Yeah, great to give us this introduction and overview of the report. I should say also that who I am maybe before we continue. So my name is Sebastian Sirén, as I said, but I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the Political Science Department in Uppsala, and I'm also a member of the board of the Fackförbundet ST in the university and higher education sector. So that's on the record as well. But I would now also like to invite Camilla Hansén, who is a member of parliament and a spokesperson on education policy for the Green Party in Sweden. And I'm very glad that you were able to join us for this first part of the seminar. And I would just like to invite you to sort of give us your initial reflections on the reports and the findings that Sandra has presented to us.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, as you might have heard of, we do have some kind of a disagreement around our attendance rules when it comes to voting, which means that 100% of us needs to be voting every time. So no excuses for important meetings like this or anything else. Towards the in about 15 minutes, I will turn my camera off, but I will keep listening until I get into the chamber, so you know that I will spy on you a bit, even though you can't see me. So reflections on this report. First of all, it's always disappointing, I think, when to get in a report and hoping for improvements and seeing that no, this is still bad. And I wish that I could say that I am surprised. And when it comes to, I mean, doctoral students and doctoral studies is a hardship for anyone. And when you are coming to another country and a new culture, you express even more challenges. And I think one of the things when it comes to migration to Sweden, now we have a government that's proud of throwing as many people from other countries out as possible and restraining people to coming into the country. That's the baseline. But then they are also saying that, well, if you're highly educated, then please come. So you would think, and for me, that's and I think maybe for many other persons that are highly educated, that's a way of making a difference between people that maybe is not too agreeable. But even when they are saying that, please come, highly educated PhD students, researchers, it's still very complicated to deal with the migration board. And these long waiting times to get a decision on your application that is actually damaging to people's lives and health. And one thing when it comes to doctoral students, I think that for some reason it seems like the word student gives the idea that these are young people without relations. But we know that students, PhD students, are a broader group than that. I mean, you do have or you might have a partner, you might have children, and you need to have a secure family situation for your whole family. And there are improvements in the migration legislation, and we will see how far that is going. One thing that I'm also reflecting on in the report is when it comes to discrimination and due to racism. to your ethnicity, and where it's like Swedish doctoral students, says it's 1% that happens to if you're within European Union, 10%, and if you're from countries outside of the European Union, as many as 24% experience discrimination due to their ethnicity, which is I think, horrifying.
Mm.
But it is sadly consistent with what I meet what I hear when I meet students and researchers, but also in all kinds of professions. If it's in healthcare, or if it is in other kind of more manual labor, where a lot of people come from different countries, that the thing that really makes them disappointed and where they notice a change is that it seems to be more okay to be openly racist in Sweden nowadays. And the Green Party, of course, has been fighting this a long time, and we are trying to make our point in the political debate when it comes to anti-racism, when it comes to humane migration laws, and when it comes to having like an ethical standard, how we treat each other as human beings. And we also see that in Sweden, where our strength is our diversity, and that is within academia as well as in the rest of the country. So, some reflections. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Camilla. And I also wonder what you think, considering these difficulties and challenges and problems in the sector, given the fact that sort of international students are an increasing share of the pool of doctoral students we have. How should we view this?
I think I don't know what you know about my background, but I'm on a leave of absence from a position as an analyst at a university in Sweden, and I haven't been in the academia all my career, so I came, so to speak, from the outside. And what I noticed when I came to the university is the picture of themselves was that it's so very attractive to be a researcher. And of course it is. But I also had to explain that the reason why we don't get applicants when we want teachers to come and teach at the teachers program is because the wage is too low. And when it comes to people, I mean, now I'm 50 years old. I happen to know that the decrease in the ratio of Swedish versus foreign PhD students, it started with the generation born in 1976, which is me. And I remember when I was in 25, 30s, and you know, it's not attractive to not be able to go to the bank and take a mortgage on your house because you don't have a secure employment when you work at the university. And that is something that me and people in my age met. And I think the universities have to be a more modern workplace. You have to be able to provide secure employment. And it's not like, you know, we're not, I don't want to you know, look down on any professions. But if you're a PhD student, you are highly skilled, you are highly trained. You have become a researcher, and we as a society has invested huge amounts in you becoming that. And then we say, oh, so we will give you an employment 1 year or maybe 2. And then you will be eligible to apply for the next 1 or 2 year employment. And that's just not attractive enough. That's not a serious way of being an employer, I think, in modern society. And I don't know why we would think that for most professions, you know, you talk about security is something that gives you the peace of mind to be creative and productive. But just when it comes to PhD students and when it comes to researchers, it says, no. You have to be insecure so we know that you will work hard enough. And I don't buy that. I think the academia in Sweden needs to think about how they should become a modern, attractive workplace.
Sandra, what's your thoughts about these issues.
Yes, thank you, Camilla. Very many good points. But I would like to press a bit regarding this question of offering more secure employment, because that is also a political issue, with the decreasing proportion of research funding that goes directly to the universities, which hinder them in actually being able to offer more secure employment. And I would like to hear your perspective on that issue as well, on the foundations for actually having a more secure employment at the universities.
I think you're just describing a problem when it comes to funding that it's easy to talk about academic freedom and then say, you know, put all kinds of restraints on how universities should earn their money or earn their funding. And in our budgets, we do give more money to universities. We do. Oh, now you have to have language help, please. But what is it? Productivity deduction? What it? You know, produktivitetsavdraget.
Yes,
What is it called? Yeah. So we don't have that in our budgets, and that's not a huge amount of money. I will admit that, but what it stops this decrease. And we also oppose these that everything comes with a condition. Even what's supposed to be the university basic funding comes with conditions, and these conditions needs to be removed so that the universities really can prioritize safe and secure employment.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think these are issues that we are very happy to discuss further from a union perspective. But I mean, you already touched upon these issues about sort of how thinking about there's a great push for internationalization within higher education and within research, and with at the same time we are then seeing these problems and challenges with internationalizing our the workforce within and I mean, it seems like you also see this problem.
Yeah, I agree. Now I have to start moving towards the chamber, but I will just turn my camera off and I will keep listening to you. And I do hope that we can meet during calmer circumstances and maybe have a more thorough conversation about this sometime in the future.
Thank you very much, Camilla, for taking the time to participate between everything. So,
thank you. I'm happy to.
With that said, we're moving on, and we have a distinguished panel who will also have their say on these issues. But before inviting the panelists, I would like Oskar Eriksson, who has been the one actually writing this report and preparing this for us, to give us a bit of a deeper overview of the content of the report for us. So Oskar Eriksson, who is an analyst at Fackförbundet ST, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. Well, let me start with saying that this is the first report regarding the situation of doctoral students that Fackförbundet ST and SFS will drop this year. The second one will be a more general overview and will be released in September. So please keep an eye out for that one as well. Regarding this specific report, we had around 1,500 doctoral students who responded to the survey, which was conducted by Indicator, which Sandra mentioned earlier, giving a response rate of 40%. Of these 40%, out of the respondents, 40% were international doctoral students. And we also categorized these into two groups, which Sandra also mentioned, but I'm just going to say also that the EU and EEA countries are then obviously the EU countries, but also adding Iceland, Norway, and Liechtenstein. And the third country doctoral students, as we call them in the report, are basically the rest of the countries, or not included in the Swedish ones or the EU/EEA countries. These doctoral students that replied to the survey and they come from 9 different Swedish universities, and they were chosen based on the size of these universities and also the amount of doctoral students that they have. As I mentioned, since there will be another report coming in September, we will need to wait until then to give full transparency regarding all the tables and things like that as well. Also, I can say that the reports both in Swedish and English are available on our website, st.org. But please note that the English version is still a draft report and will be updated shortly, hopefully within later this week. So keep that in mind if you've already read the report or planning to do so. Also, this type of report is a new report for us. We previously made the report that we called "How is the doctoral students doing?" But since we looked into the result, we felt like it was urgent that we took the time to actually focus on the situation for the international doctoral students in a separate report as well. The reason for this, of course, being that the results, unfortunately, are worse in many aspects compared to the Swedish doctoral students. And we also found out in the results of the survey that doctoral students without proficiency in Swedish also reported significantly worse results. Yes, now I just remembered that I was supposed to change the slides as well. Okay, great. Let me dive into the main aspects of the report, which is obviously the results of it as well. These are not all the important results, but some of the main ones that we have time to look through this time. First of all, regarding the international doctoral students, 40% of them, they have sleep problems at least once a week, compared to, I think it was 27% of the Swedish doctoral students. Also, and over 70%, they feel and often feel work-related stress, compared to 59%, I think it was, of the, 54% of the Swedish doctoral students. We can also see that around 50% have problem focusing on other things than their work or studies at least once a week, compared to 37% of the Swedish doctoral students. As previously mentioned, the results for about discriminations were also worse for the international doctoral students. Slightly above 25% have experienced this related to the protected grounds of discrimination. And they also differed a bit between the groups. The EU/EEA students had experienced it 24%, and 29% of the doctoral students have experienced harassments or discrimination, compared to 11% of the Swedish ones. Also, the international students had experienced significantly higher levels based on this following categories, so to speak, which also Camilla mentioned before. Ethnicity was one of the main ones, but also gender, religious beliefs, and sexual orientations. The international students had experienced to a high degree. Another result which was alarming is that when reporting this discrimination or harassment, the international doctoral students also felt like they were not taken seriously to a higher extent than their Swedish colleagues. Also alarming, of course. Then, in general, about the results for this group is that the EU. That the third country doctoral students in general reported worse results than the EU/EEA students, even though it wasn't the case for every issue, but in general, I would say. Yes, and These results that were presented earlier are also in most cases similar for the ones with the insufficient proficiency in Swedish, but there are also some results that stand out even more for this group. And some of those results are that 20% of the doctoral students without this proficiency in Swedish reported being left out of professional information every week. The same amount also felt like they were being left out of collegial interactions every week. 15% of this group reported that they work overtime every day, and that can be compared to 5% of the students with sufficient proficiency in Swedish, as I should say. Also, 15% of this group didn't take all the holiday leave that they were entitled to because of the workload being too high. Yes. Lastly, I will also go into a few of the recommendations. I think that Sandra mentioned some of them, but one of the recommendations we make in this report is to the government and politicians, and is to strengthen the employment security within higher education institutions after completion of the doctoral degree, so that uncertain employment conditions do not worsen migration-related uncertainty. For the universities, they need to take a greater responsibility for the international doctoral students' work-related stress and its consequences. They need to raise ambitions and increase efforts to combat all forms of discrimination and harassment against international doctoral students. Ensure that education on discrimination and sexual harassment is included into the introduction for doctoral students in a language appropriate for the target group. Ensure that all reports of discrimination and harassment are being investigated and followed up, and that those affected offer sufficient support, of course. Offer better individual support on migration issues for doctoral students in matter relating to work and education. And then lastly, create better opportunities for international doctoral students to learn Swedish during their during their doctoral studies, because of what has shown earlier in the report. That was it for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oskar, for that overview. And let me now introduce some of the panelists who will also give their views on these issues. We have with us Rayan Falangi, who is a doctoral student at Linköping University and who is a member of the doctoral committee of the Swedish National Union of Students, so representing the doctoral students themselves here. We have Per Weihed, who is Pro Vice Chancellor at Luleå University of Technology, and also professor and chair of the Rectors Internationalization Council. I don't know if that's what it's called, but something like that. We have also Ulrika Åstrand, who is representing Euraccess Sweden. Euraccess, that is a European initiative supporting mobility of researchers in Europe. And also Sebastian Andersson, who is a safety representative. I don't know if you should say chief safety representative at Stockholm University. So we have a range of perspectives here that which I'm very happy for. But so let's start off with Rayan. From the doctoral students' perspective, we hear some alarming figures here. What are the sort of most pressing issues, or the most alarming ones, according to your perspective?
Yeah, thank you, Sebastian. So I think there is no doubt that the issues regarding harassment and discriminations are the ones that needs to be urgently addressed, and or like according to zero tolerance policies. There is no doubt in that, I think. But I'd like to also focus a little bit more on the stress-related issues for doctoral students. I think it's not like it's a multidimensional problem really, and it should be addressed at different levels of PhD studies, and it should be addressed by different entities who are involved in PhD education. And I would like to address one like a common belief maybe like whenever there's a discussion around stress-related issues for PhD studies, then one quick response is that, but that is inherent for PhD studies because that's how it is everywhere. And I can understand where it comes from because we're like in doctoral studies, we are trying to fit research within time frame that's inherently, you know, they are not consistent with each other really. And then I can understand that, but then the experience of a PhD student is heavily affected by the support network that they receive during their PhD studies, and it does not need to be more stressful than it is already. It can be different experienced. So I would say that there should be more like continuous support during different phases of PhD studies, and especially for international students, there is like the initial. So there is the initial phase for PhD students in general, and then there is the initial phase for international PhD students, where most of or many of them have just entered a new country and a new culture and sometimes a new language and everything. So that obviously there are different needs there that should be addressed. And I think it's very important for organizations who work with PhD students to be aware of these needs. Then like also related to the stress issues, that I think something that should be addressed is the language, language related issues. And again, I don't think it's a problem that can be solved by a single entity. I think it's a collaboration between the PhD student and the university and the government. And I think everyone should take their part in this. Otherwise, it's going to be like a burden carried by the PhD student themselves that results into like the numbers that we've seen, overwork and all the stress related problems. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And now we are raising a lot of concerns and issues and challenges here. And I would like to turn to Per and ask that from a university, an employer perspective, sort of what can we do, and what can universities do to act on these challenges?
Well, thanks for having me and be possible to talk to you all on this extremely important issue. And I guess the short answer is that we should listen to the previous speaker, because you raised a lot of extremely important issues related to this. I fundamentally think that we need to engage with international students from day one as a university, and so if you have those team building efforts in place from day one, I think a lot of these issues are actually solved. In my own university, I think we have up to around 60% of our PhD students are international, and all the research communities are highly international. So the success in really organizing this is that you engage and team build early as you were into, Rihanna. And then you also raised the issue of a language. I think it's boring to say that 2026 the language is still an issue, but it is a big issue, and I think this was raised also in the report that for instance in several universities, including my own, there are examples where steering documents, policies, and so forth are not translated to English. And that brings me to another, I think, extremely important issue. It's really for international students coming into Sweden, they need to learn a new culture, as you mentioned, and I think that's also a fundamental issue, that we need to understand Sweden, and we need to understand Swedes. And if you manage to do that, and you get into an environment where you actually create these team building efforts, and you start to understand how Swedish universities function, because we are different from universities in other countries, and we are even different between Swedish universities. So these are issues that you need to understand, and then you also need to be engaged in the day-to-day business inside your department, in your university. So, for instance, we see that there is a fundamental shortage of international staff and PhD students in our different governing boards in the university. And that means that we have some sort of secondary staff members which are not engaged in taking decisions, steering and governing the university. So language, I think, is extremely important, and I don't think it should be so extremely hard to work with bilingual efforts in that sense. And I think in many of our research communities, English is the working language, but it's not in the universities. So I think these are, I think, extremely important issues. Then when I read the report, I was also thinking, is there a difference between international PhD students on a PhD position and on stipends? Because we still in 2026 have PhD students, international PhD students on stipends. And I think that puts another sort of pressure on the student, which I think would be interesting to understand if that's, I'm not sure if Oscar can answer that, but for me, it would be an interesting thing to understand better. And I guess the final thing is that we are talking about academia per se. You also need to remember that the majority of the PhD students should not stay in academia. They should go out to industry, to public sector. So industry and public sector needs to be better integrated into the PhD environments in order to have a better understanding of work opportunities after the PhD, because that releases some burden, I think, on the PhD students. So that's it's a short answer on an extremely complex question, I think, Sebastian, but I guess that's my main message, I guess, in this context.
Yes, thank you, Per. And then I would also like to hear Sebastian's reflection on sort of how you view these challenges from sort of working with work environment and safe workplaces in your everyday job.
Yeah, as the former speaker, I think I'm also jumping on the Rayhan train of we have to see these issues as multidimensional. They are systematic. These are not things we can, like one person can fix. This has to be in cooperation between the PhD students, the employer, and the safety organization. And of course, I'd like to sit here and say, in the safety organization, we're always good at catching risks early and avoiding them altogether. But I think, like most of us who are in contact with these issues, we can notice that we're maybe better at explaining and rationalizing them after the fact that it already went wrong. And when it comes to the group of international PhD students, that's a group where I already think we can see a huge gap between the good intentions you could have in a meeting where you're discussing these issues and the very harsh reality that becomes visible on the floor. And even now that we're discussing it, I feel like no matter who we are here, employers, unions, security officers, politicians, we see this. We see that this is a group that experiences higher levels of stress, greater exposure to risks in their work environment. Yet we seem to also collectively fall short of addressing it constantly. And just some examples. I think what Per said about being bilingual is very a common discussion when it comes to these issues, where we might get a policy of at this department we will be speaking English in order to be inclusive. Yet then, like a couple of weeks later, we noticed that speakers at meetings are allowed to just switch back to Swedish in order to make it more comfortable for themselves, and not even to mention more social events or the fika breaks, where even suggesting switching to English will more often than not be met with eye rolls and like a constant questioning of it, unless, of course, you're lucky enough to be at a department where English speaking is already overwhelmingly dominant. Same with the supervising and work management. Per also mentioned that we have often policies and routines that are supposed to like catch these issues, yet we still can see that you sometimes get managers and supervisors who are unable to offer more structural support to PhD students who are in rehabilitation, other than just saying, oh, just get back to your writing again, which might not be exactly what you need to hear when you're on your way back from a burnout, fully aware that like the clock is ticking on your PhD time, and given also that you might unceremoniously be thrown out of the country when that clock hits zero. So what I like also play on what Rehan said when it comes to the main objective should be to frame these issues for what they are, which is systemic issues. They are multidimensional. These are not individual problems. And that is a big problem when it comes to just academia as well. We are not very good at discussing structural problems, in my experience. We are better at pointing out individuals and say, you need to figure out your stressful situation, instead of saying, why is the system stressful? And the most important of all, given what the system is, how can we make it less stressful given the situation we have? I should also, yeah, thanks.
I also like to hear Ulrika's reflection, given that you also work with sort of international mobility. It seems like this there are a lot of challenges to supporting international students here. So what do you think about this?
Well, thank you, first of all, for having me. I represent Your Access Sweden, which is a network of 33 higher education institutions in Sweden. And we work quite tightly together with different issues relating to international doctoral students and researchers. And I can only agree with all the speakers, and I think Per took the word out of my mouth on what I was intending to say. But we've heard about migration, which of course is very important. It's important to have a stable and predictable migration legislation. And although it's getting a little bit better from Thursday on, there are still some issues that can be worked on, such as family-based migration, which can be a problem in the future, and also almost equally important that you have your partner and family being set and like it here in Sweden. I also totally agree on the language phase. We did a report in Your Access Sweden 2 years ago, where language was one of the hinders to stay in Sweden. As we know, the government really wants highly educated people to stay in Sweden. And we have our doctoral students, of whom we know not all can stay in academia. There are not enough positions, of course. But we want to keep them in Sweden. So language is super important, both in terms of getting managerial roles or leading roles at the university, as Per mentioned, but also for the daily life and get integrated into the society, not only in work, because you can do research for years and years and years in English, but just the private life, or as you said, the fika times, and also getting to know the culture a bit better. I think it's easier if you know Swedish as well. But not the least, if you want to go outside if you want to stay in Sweden, but not in academia, and you're going to transfer to outside academia, how can we help these PhD students with that? So in our report, we proposed, the starting early, to have the conversation, to actually put in the curricula or the ISP time to be able to do career courses, mentoring programs, internships programs. And today, there are not many universities in Sweden offering this kind of support to PhD students. I will take Karolinska Institutet as an example. They have an excellent program. I see Vladimir here, so I wanted to throw Karolinska in there. But I don't think, or we don't think, that it should depend which university you do your doctoral studies at. That should be universal. So given time to prepare for a career, whether it's in academia or outside in Sweden, we want to make them feel welcome. And also give them time as part of the PhD studies to learn the language, not something you do on your spare time, because we've seen that many has one day a week where they can't do anything else but think of work. Super important. And we need to do something for their partners and family as well. If you have a partner who doesn't get settled into the society and doesn't find a job, that's going to cause even more stress, and eventually you're going to leave, which is $1 million question for Swedish academia, since we spend a lot of money on PhD students. So I just want to say from our report, Can Sweden Afford to Lose Them, which we did 2024, I'll take from one PhD student a comment. And she said that she felt very sad when she were coming to the end of her PhD studies, because she had put her whole life in 5 years. And then she didn't get, I even get little tears here, but she didn't get one question about what is your plan now? What are you going to do? Do you need some help? Are you going to stay in Sweden? Are you going to go back to your country? Not one question. So she wrote that she felt used and not welcome into this country. So I'll stop there.
That's really saddening to hear. And I would like also to invite Sandra to reflect on these interventions, and also to think about, sort of from a union perspective, what can we do?
Yes, thank you, Sebastian, and thank you everyone for your excellent points in this discussion. Firstly, I would like to say that, as many of you have already raised, these are systemic issues, but I especially also think that sometimes in the active work environment and equal treatment work at the universities, it's easy to treat everybody as if they are the same. So stress is impacting everyone, and discrimination may be impacting everyone, and all groups in different ways. But I think what this report shows is that we actually need to have a continuous awareness of the fact that certain groups are being impacted more heavily than others. And unless we actually remember that in all of this structural work that we are doing to improve the work environment and create equal treatment at the universities, we will not be able to address these issues. And so I think that's a very serious kind of task to send with both like employers and safety representatives, and of course trade unions and student unions as well, to actually have this with us at all times when we are working on these issues. So the solution might not be the same for everyone at the university. We need to have more specific solutions for the particular groups that we are focusing on today. And that I think is extremely important. And then when it comes to what support trade unions can offer, I think that this is that's a lot, basically. So of course we work on this political issues with migration, for example, and the funding for the universities and better employment security. But we also are involved in negotiating the conditions and terms, of course, of the work that PhD students do. And we are part of the work environment systems and the systems regarding equal treatment at the universities, and we need to be very active there in pushing for improvements for this group vis-a-vis the employer and with the employer, because as we hear, I mean, we all want an improvement in this area. But we also need to make sure that doctoral students know that they can turn to us, that we are actually a very active participant in safeguarding their interests and trying to improve their situation both structurally and individually. And I think that this is not as well known as it needs to be. And the same goes for all the important work being done by student unions as well. So it's very important that doctoral students in general and international doctoral students in particular do not feel alone with these problems that they may be facing. And that they can turn to us for support. And that we are very much involved and engaged in improving this situation, because these are very serious issues that have been raised, both the stress issues, but even more the questions of discrimination and harassment. Because usually when these types of reports are being done, you can see kind of it's a zero, like a single digit numbers for discrimination and harassment, which is good. I mean, we want zero on these issues, no experiences of discrimination. But to have groups which experience discrimination or harassment based on the grounds for discrimination in the Swedish legislation that experience this to a degree of like 29% is actually completely catastrophic. And so that is really an area where we need to have much higher ambitions going forward.
Especially as this is a large and growing share of the PhD workforce also. And exactly. So Per, from a sort of a university perspective, do you see a way ahead working for a more sustainable internationalization?
Yeah, sustainable internationalization is a huge issue. And I guess in the context we're discussing here today, from a purely selfish perspective, I think we fundamentally need to rethink our migration legislation. It's totally crazy. These are the highest performing and highest skilled young people in the country. And once they've finalized their PhD, we kick them out. If we continue to do that, I think the competitiveness of Sweden will go down. It's as simple as that. So if I had one choice, change that and take care of these skilled young people and engage with them, not only in academia, but also, as I said previously, with public sector, with industry, because we need these people in Sweden. So for me, it's we put millions and millions of Swedish kronor into the education, and then they are highly educated, and then they go and are beneficial for other industries, other countries, which I guess are really happy for the crazy Swedes that we do this. So if I just one point is that we need to change this and make it much better for them to stay in Sweden and on good conditions. And that applies, of course, to the university system, which I think it is competitive, and we are working a lot on soft money. And someone raised the issue, I think it was it you, Sandra, or our politicians that mentioned that Sweden stands out in the context that we live to a much higher degree on soft money in the universities. And that limits our possibilities to engage in longer term employment agreements with PhD students, with other staff as well. So that's another thing that needs to change then, to become more similar to all other countries in Europe, for instance, because there we stand out in a really, really negative way, I think. So and of course, there are a number of other things that we should do as well. But if you want force me to talk about sustainable internationalization and be a bit selfish as a Sweden, we need to keep these youngsters in Sweden. And immigration legislation doesn't help.
Yeah, and I also see that I need to force everyone to soon. I need to interrupt this discussion. We are soon wrapping up, but I wanted to leave a word also to Rayan to ask sort of about the PhD student perspective. Sort of what are the opportunities ahead, and sort of where do you see this going?
So I think I again would like to go back to the to the point I mentioned. I think first PhD students need to be communicated with to understand the problems, which I guess this survey is one good step towards it, and then to work within different levels that this problem can be addressed. I think that's the most important one. And then, of course, to try to eliminate undeterminism as much as possible from this system that is causing a huge stress for PhD students in different things, from short-term employments to migration legislations and all.
Thank you very much. And I know that sort of this report and this seminar is sort of one stepping stone and one input to this, to sort of our engagement in these issues. And I thank you all for engaging in this discussion here and for engaging in these issues in your ordinary work where you are. And I know Fackförbundet ST will continue working on this and as both and to improve work conditions and work environment for all employees at our universities. So I don't know, Sandra, is there anything else we need to sort of send people off with before we leave them?
No, just that they can keep their eyes out for events locally at the universities and also further webinars, especially after we've published the full report in September. So there will be a series of events trying to address this, and it will be both national ones and local ones at different universities. And then at those events, we can also perhaps have more of a two-way conversation with the PhD students and other people who are involved in these issues, which we very much look forward to.
So thank you all, and run out in the Swedish summer. So thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.